Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We will give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Kevin Jordan. Kevin is the founder and CEO of Kevin Jordan Coach, an independent leadership and career coaching and consulting practice. In his work, Kevin serves as an executive leadership coach, strategic advisor, career architect, and team catalyzer. He partners with executives, their leadership teams, and other emerging leaders to confidently optimize their strategic and brand presence, transform their leadership effectiveness, and facilitate career transitions in support of their personal aspirations. You can find Kevin by going on LinkedIn and searching Kevin P. Jordan, or going to his website, kevinjordan.coach, or emailing him at kevin@kevinjordan.coach. Hello, Kevin. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hey, Olivia, great to be here. I'm very excited for our conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a joy, and let's dive right in. To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Kevin Jordan?
Sure. So I define success in terms of the word consonance, and this was really captured by Laura Gassner-Otting's work in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago. And it goes like this. Consonance is the sense of frictionless belonging, momentous stride, or core relevance. It is a guiding force that reveals how our work contributes to my overall life and plan. It's all about my purpose, freely and clearly defined by me. So I really love that definition because she anchors around four key components of consonance. So one is your calling, two is your connection, three is your contribution, and four is control. So for me, I translate that service is my calling and has been for the arc of my career, the majority of which was spent in nonprofit healthcare at Kaiser Permanente here in the West Coast. My coaching, consulting, training work, et cetera, they're all my craft and the most current manifestations of my calling. So people are the linchpin to any successful organization, as I'm sure you know with the guests you have on. And I love being in service to and learning from folks because the ultimate goal is an integrated whole that reflects both my professional and personal values. So if I drill down a little bit more from a client perspective, I think this recent quote, and I'm paraphrasing here, or compliment, I should say, really sums it up. A gentleman who I work with, he said, "Hey, Kevin, I totally trust you and your judgment. You have helped me improve the team, and I know you're providing great help and perspective. Thank you for your continued support. We've been working together for 3 or 4 years now." And then from a personal perspective, one of the ways I measure success is I take a month off, and it's coming up every year just to kind of shut it down, read, recharge. So I try to look at success from a kind of almost a metaphysical sort of state to a client state to a personal state.
And I love that. And I think it's so important to recheck in with yourself sometimes. Our goals do pivot, right? That's kind of the point of the show, is identify what success really is in all of our journeys of life. So I love that you brought that into it. And the fact that we have to realize, like you said, you're almost at that time of the year where you take a month off, recharge, what those moments look like to all of us. Is it taking a month off? Is it, if you own your own business or work it into the schedule of taking every Friday off, or that one day a week, and saying, okay, this is my day, this is what I'm doing, or figuring out your time blocks. And Kevin, you and I have talked about this a lot, both being business owners, and the great side of creating your own schedule and the hard side of creating your own schedule, because things pop up. And as a business owner, you have to move with the flow. And you have to, I would say sometimes we all feel the pressure of extending our days, extending our workload to meet a deadline or to get that other client. As your business has grown, how have you adjusted to that to make sure you're still feeding yourself and making sure you're having that balance?
Yeah, so I actually I moved away from the term balance and much more into integration or harmony. So work-life integration, work-life harmony. So what I've done is, and I work with my clients on, so I practice what I preach here, is took a step back when I started this journey about 5 years ago and have keep doing it every year and really define what's most important to me, both personally and professionally, and then how do I want to integrate that. So the boundary management piece is actually a tough one for me because I love what I do. I mean, I tell my clients, which is true, if I had all the money in the world, I would still do this as long as I was of service to people. So I love to work. I love to do these things. I love to be out there. I love to be interacting. So I've really had to learn how to say no more often than yes. And so for me, that's looking at things like, well, I'll ask myself, I could do that, but do I really want to do that? If it's just sort of I could, then I'm probably going to say no. If it's I really want to, then I'm going to try to figure out how can I make that happen within the context of my schedule. And you're right, and especially at this time of year, this just happened this morning prior to our chat. Gentleman reached out, said, "Hey, I got this great referral from you. We want to do this offsite in January, and I need to talk to you within the day because I got to have a budget planning conversation on Wednesday." So, especially at the year end when people are wrapping up, they're trying to do different things. There's a demand to be more available, even if, and so how do I, navigate through that? And mostly it's asking those kinds of questions that I outlined before. And especially if it's a referral, I'd probably give that a little bit more weight than someone just could have sort of totally out of the blue. But it's an ongoing struggle for me, and I think it will be for the entirety of my this next phase of my professional journey. And it's a struggle that, frankly, I don't mind having because it's a good problem to have if you're in demand. And two, it's like, it forces me to keep reevaluating and reprioritizing what was important 5 years ago isn't necessarily as important now. And I don't know what will be more important in the next 2 to 5 years. So,
And I think that is important as well as saying what you had said earlier of what do we need to be doing and what do I want to be doing? Do they align? Understanding, like you said, sometimes things hold more weight, especially towards the end of the year. It's very true. People have these deadlines, whether they are deadlines due to the fourth quarter or, money or just feeling like it has to get wrapped up before the holidays. So, how do you balance the availability? But it is also very true, especially as a business owner. I feel like there is that balance between loving what you're doing. And when you love it, it can end up sometimes being a lot easier to just keep saying yes
yes.
to those meetings or to those events or to those calls or whatever it might be. And then the next thing you know, oh, I'm doing what I love, but I have a 16-hour day every day for the next 4 days. It
Right.
that can end up causing some burnout as well. But that's part of navigating how we all look at what is our integration like, both on the personal side and the professional side, and how do we create that integration so that we're not sitting here overwhelmed and going, okay, I have value too, but if I am too overwhelmed, I'm not going to bring that value to the table.
Exactly.
For
Exactly. And it would be at best just disingenuous of me to be expecting my clients to work on these things and I'm not role modeling that behavior. So quite often, even if they don't own their own business, because I work with an array of clients, we'll have this kind of conversation and it will come to like where you and I are right now. Is like, well, Kevin, what do you do? And I'll tell them, where I do it well and where I do it not so well. And so I'm a big believer in that the old phrase, practice what you preach, right? Because otherwise it's, you know, I'm not being in service to these folks the way they need to be. And, as I said before, I do ultimately think it's a good problem to have. And you're right, the dark side it can start to be an excuse. Well, I love what I do, so I'll just do this and I might burn myself out and I might do X, Y, and Z, not intentionally, but because we're not stopping and saying, hey, do I need to take a pause? Hey, how can I recharge now by saying no so I can be in better service to the folks that I have, and the folks that I work with. So
and I think that's so important in these aspect of burnout, but also being able to show up in different areas of your life
yeah,
because it can go both ways. It could also go personal when family or friends are doing all these activities. You want to show up and be there for all of them. You want to participate, especially around the holidays.
right.
But then, okay, you end up not being able to participate in things that need to get done in the work life.
Right.
So it can definitely go both ways. Kevin, for you, as you started growing your business and going down this part of your life where you're owning your own business and you're figuring out what works for you and the company and your clients and figuring out what doesn't work, as someone who didn't have that necessarily entrepreneurship background, how have you navigated the business space and being a business owner?
Yes, let me start with a little context. I had figured out I wanted to do this work about 10 years ago. So at that time, I started with a very small private practice, and that would be a very generous term. It was just helping people before work, helping people after work, maybe helping people at lunch. And I did some of this in my role because leading teams, I was obviously coaching and mentoring and doing some advising, but it really wasn't the core of my career. It wasn't my job function. I wasn't I was not an internal coach at an organization. So my intent was to strategically build a professional off ramp, if you will, and have the infrastructure and some experience and some client relationships already under my belt, my certifications and trainings under my belt, so that as our daughter wrapped up her college schooling, I was going to be like, okay, here comes my next chapter. And so my ultimate vision was to be as prepared as reasonably possible for this, what I assumed would be a significant career transformation that would allow me, as you noted earlier, Olivia, to kind of explore those next professional life chapters. Okay, so the best laid plans, my timeline was accelerated because in my prior two roles, right before I started this, my positions were eliminated due to financial reasons. And after the second one, I was getting ready to kind of go back into the job search. And my wife just turned to me and she said, hey, I know it's kind of earlier than you planned, but why don't you just go for it? Why don't you just try your hand at being a solopreneur? And if I was like kind of dumbfounded, not because of what she said, because I hadn't thought of it. It's like I was so in the mode of my own plan about this was a thing that was going to happen in this case, maybe 7 years down the road. And so I said, okay. And so the deal we had was initially for the first 6 to 9 months, could I just make my financial remit? I wasn't talking about work-life integration. I wasn't talking about, is this the greatest thing for me? It's like, could I just make it work financially? Figured out pretty quickly that I could. And then I started to layer in those other things. And so it's been an evolution. I mean, I'm not clearly the same guy I was 5 years ago in this space. I think and hope for the better mostly. And but it's been a wild ride because it's you just different turns. We had COVID. I mean, I started my business a year before COVID. Then I was like, oh boy, here comes COVID. Then we've had a really funky year this year with whatever we're calling the economy these days and people kind of ups and downs and all the layoffs. So it's been an interesting time to be in this kind of 4.5, 5 year window in the larger macroeconomic and societal context as well. So,
For you, as you've gone into this space, I I like how you brought up the fact because it is so true. Sometimes we get set in our own plans so much that sometimes it's okay to accelerate it when an opportunity comes up. Like knowing that work might no longer be there, why not just dive into your own business? When you finally really decided to give it your all, go into the plan earlier than you had necessarily planned for. So I'm also assuming that all the other steps or what you imagined that starting your business would look like was probably not fully there just yet. How did you acclimate to that? And how did you start that journey knowing to yourself that you had this idea in your head and it wasn't full succession just yet?
yeah. So I'm a recovering project manager from many years ago. So I took the big daunting thing and said, stop thinking about it like that. And I broke it down into different parts. And then I went to my strengths. And one of my strengths was I love to listen and I love to hear people's stories, much like you do on your show here. So I started interviewing other coaches, colleagues, people that I knew, people that I didn't know so well. I interviewed other people that were running different types of businesses, even if they weren't more professional services. I had worked at two professional services firms, so I'd seen on a bigger scale on the inside how a lot of this stuff could apply to me on a much smaller scale. But it was largely by talking through different people and being comfortable not knowing what I didn't know and sometimes probably looking foolish in front of people with very simplistic questions or naive questions. Because I don't have a formal business training background from my college days. I mean, I took a few courses and I certainly didn't go to like Entrepreneurship 101 or anything like that. So it was much more studying other people, which is how I really charted my career. So in some respects, the modeling that I used was not very different. I was always fascinated by people who were at different stages of their career, offered different gifts to their discipline. And I would just go talk to them. Why do you do that? How do you do that? How did you get there? Why do you use those tools, et cetera? So it's a very similar approach. And then I just recognized I had to step into it. Like you could talk and read as much as you wanted, but you just have to get in there and just start doing it and have the grace and gravitas to be okay that you're going to make a bunch of mistakes. And I've learned so much over these years. And I don't look back with like, oh, darn, I'm like, I look back like, oh, well, that's just where I was. Like, I mean, that's just where I was. And I'm not really in competition with anybody but myself. So like it kind of makes the narrative for me anyway go down. It's like, okay, well, you're evolving. And so I'm a big learner. I'm a big believer in learning from failure. I'm a big believer that most everything can be a teachable moment or a coachable moment if you're willing to operate in that space. And so I leaned into the learning that I love to do and to connecting with people and just listening and processing and trying, and then not being too hard on myself, because like many of my clients, I'm my own worst critic. So I had to kind of take some of my own medicine there.
One thing you brought up, and in that answer was really an underlying theme of what I call, and what a lot of people now call, the informational interview.
Mhm.
Isn't looking for a job, but is learning about what a job might be, an industry might be like, the lessons someone has learned. And that's so important sometimes, is to understand that the informational interview is out there so you can learn from others. You
Yep.
can learn what the industry is really like. You can learn the mistakes other people have made and how they've grown from it, the transparency, and it allows you to really see something from a different perspective while being able to pick out things that other people went through of, oh, that was great. I love that idea.
Mhm.
Or, okay, now I know not to go down that track,
Right.
and helps you forge what it might look like for you to go down a certain path. And I think that's so important and forgotten about a lot of times, that in building connections with other people and having conversations, you can have that transparency within
Mhm.
an industry and with colleagues, and it can help elevate both of you at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it was very humbling to go to tell people, I don't know what I don't know. Can you please help and support me? And almost to a T, people said yes. And there was some people more than others for sure, but I don't know that anybody ever really said no. Or they might say, I don't know about a particular thing, which that's fair. That's okay. But people in my community have been very generous, very supportive, have and continue to be. I mean, when I was working with my coach for a long time, and just on my own development, and we started talking more about how would I make this transition, and I started using our session time more to interview her. I'm like, well, how did you get here? Why do you do this? How do you do it? And so, it was having folks who are willing and able to enter into those mentoring conversations and those consultative conversations and give so freely was really and continues to be a huge gift. I mean, it just is. I think too many folks, to your point, they get in their own heads and they don't just go ask. Most people will say yes. Most people will want to find a way to support you if they can. And I'm glad that I didn't let that happen, because I sometimes get into my own head. And I get asked a lot now too, especially as I've evolved. So it's a way to also pay it forward, you know. So there's been utility in where I feel like I can give something back to, maybe not directly to the folks that supported me, but to others who are making a similar journey or on a track like that. Um,
And I think giving it back and paying it forward, as you said, can be so rewarding in itself. And that is one way that it can be used as kind of a currency, right? I'm taking from someone else's skill set, and instead of paying you, I'm paying it forward. So now I'm giving someone else the
yeah.
ability to learn and take the knowledge, not just from me, but the person I learned it from, and get all those tips. And I think that's really important to identify sometimes, that it isn't just about taking or give to me, give to me, give to me. It's about paying it forward and giving to others, no matter the circumstance as well.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Kevin, as a solo entrepreneur and business owner,
Mhm.
you and I are in similar boats because our clients can be all over. We can be flying, we can be working remote, and it can look very different. However, we are each only one person, right? So there's only so much that can be done within us, and so much talking via Zoom or understanding the inner workings of a business on your business that other individuals might not see. And it can get lonely sometimes
Mhm.
too, as you start to transition into different aspects or years in the business or different circumstances that align within the business or that might pop up, right? For you, how have you dealt with that and trying to connect with others while being in a company of an employee of one?
Yeah, this is one of the things I didn't think through very thoroughly when I first started on this journey. So, as is probably clear, I love people. I love learning in general. I really love learning about people's experiences, their stories, their background. And I am extremely extroverted. So I draw my energy from interacting with folks. So the hardest part for me has been the lack of consistent daily interaction with what was previously an eclectic range of outstanding colleagues. I enjoyed going to the office. I enjoyed traveling to meet with colleagues or clients. I enjoyed that real time connection and camaraderie, even if you were just sort of kind of talking about the weekend near the metaphorical water cooler or the literal water cooler. And I had the great privilege to have worked with so many outstanding people. So I tried in the moment not to take it for granted, but I do miss it. And so what I've done, I won't say a substitute, but it's kind of the next evolution of I've really put a premium on cultivating other professional and personal relationships. So it might be with other coaches where we're doing one-on-one or small group, just how's it going, trading business tips. Might be with other consultants who are not really doing coaching, but other kind of because I do training work and facilitation work and other consultative work. Professional networking groups have been great. And then more personally, especially since we recently moved physically to another part of the state, community groups. So like the Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and getting involved with people with events in town. And so really kind of putting myself out there, which that part isn't so hard. It's now then figuring out to where we started this conversation, what are the groups that really excite me? How do I not overextend so I'm not able to show up in a helpful and productive way while still feeling more integrated into these various personal and professional communities? So I definitely work alone. I would say I'm not lonely, and I love the one-on-one time I get with clients because it's mostly in these types of settings we're doing right now, and some in person as well. But it's not enough. I definitely need to have a larger range of connectivity, and so I've had to really challenge myself. Don't stay in the office or the house all day. Get out, take a walk, go see people. Um, and that's been fun. And it's been fun doing that in the context of learning a new space and having net new relationships while still keeping my previous relationships and cultivating them just in a different way. So,
And I think what you said there of challenging yourself, but also setting the boundaries of not getting overly involved to where you're spreading yourself so thin is something that we all need to think about. Because, especially in today's age, and one thing that I feel like COVID really kind of made us think about, I don't want to say the word exploit, but it really honed in whether you own your business and you're a solo entrepreneur, or you work for a massive company like Lockheed Martin, but now most of the employees are working remote. There is that lack of connectivity sometimes, right? Depending on what you're doing. Yeah, you can have meetings, you can have Zoom calls, but is okay, I'm gonna hop on the call. Cameras might be on sometimes, cameras might be off. Then I'm gonna log off, continue with my work. And you don't get that cooler talk, you know, hanging around the cooler like you did in the office, just walking by, going to lunch. So it's important to take the step back sometimes and say, I need to carve this into my schedule. But
yeah.
for you, how have you, especially with relocating too, you're diving into both ends now.
Mhm.
And how have you made sure that as you've looked for different groups to get involved on, you personally have made sure you haven't started saying yes to too much or getting overly involved to gain that connection with individuals? Like, what do you look for?
Yeah. So in my particular case, this was made a little bit easier because my wife was doing work in the area we moved in for the year prior to us moving. So she really trailblazed a whole bunch of different groups of people that I could sort of plug and play with. And she knows me well enough to know who I'll who I'll do better with and who I won't do as well with. So she's been a great resource because she's very involved in the community just with the nature of her work and her role. She's very involved with other businesses. So I followed her lead, and she's usually pretty right about these things. And then I've just kind of had some experiments. I've just tested some things out, and sometimes there may be a longer list, but the time commitment for different things is smaller. So I try not to look at it strictly as a volume or a number thing. It's more about, what do I believe I can contribute? What does the group need, and how can I best support it with the gifts and the strengths that I have? And then what is a meaningful contribution that I think I can make? So it varies, but the underlying part of your question is, I started very small. I've started with just going deep on a couple of things and seeing, is this kind of for me? Where my tendency is a little bit more of a shotgun blast usually, like I'll go a little bit wider before I go deeper. So I've had to kind of recalibrate myself on this, and in a helpful way. It hasn't been like this big dramatic thing, but definitely like, oh, maybe the old ways aren't going to serve you as well here, because you could, to your point, it's very easy to get overextended. There's a lot going on in town. There's a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of stuff I'm not saying no to, but I'm also not saying yes. I don't know where that would fit. So I want to reserve the right to maybe jump in later while I experiment with these other things right now. So it's more about, not being static. It's about being dynamic and seeing how my priorities change. A lot of things are driven by my schedule. As you and I were talking before the start of the show, this year was a strange year insofar as I traveled a lot for work. Good problem to have. I hadn't really done that for the last 3 or 4 years. So I was gone big chunks of time. Loved it, loved the clients, loved the work, but I had to come back and like, ooh, and how am I going to think about this for 2024? Like, how much do I want to do? Where do I want to go? How do I want to space it if I can? So some of it's also just real time learning and then editing, rinse, repeat. So
And you brought it up. We'd mentioned this prior to the show. It's the same thing I've gone through this year as well, with the growth of the business, as well as really traveling due to different work engagements where we might have not seen that in the past in different organizations, or depending on what you do. And you really sometimes have to do a check in, like you said, and go, okay, what does it look like going into 2024? Because as the podcast and the business for me grew in great ways in 1 year, it really challenged being present in different areas and what I can handle. I, like yourself, sometimes go the shotgun way and just say, yes, I want to be involved. And, even as we started wrapping down 2023, there were certain boards I'm a part of, certain things where people were like, we really want you to participate. We really want you to still be doing this. And I had to look at, where's the business going? Time commitment wise, what can I commit? Is that the expectation? And say, yes, this is something I want to do and I can make the time for. Or listen, I can show up and I can deliver, but I need things scaled back. Is that acceptable? Like, is that something we can work on? And if not, then this is where the focus is. And it's also, when I think you get to be that transparent about it and go, this is what I can handle.
right.
People have a different level of understanding than just shutting down and saying no, or just doing it to say yes. And then you're getting the burnout, or you're not showing up as needed. But it does become a lot when you have the quick turnovers. And I was saying, between the middle of August and uh, Thanksgiving time frame, I was traveling once a week on
Mm,
average, of having a turnaround time of 24 to 72 hours. You get
wow.
home, you got to unpack, repack, get work done, and show up for your clients and show up for different individuals in the way they're expecting. And I think sometimes, probably like you've experienced, Kevin, when you have to show up and you have different commitments and a lot of traveling going on, I think having a lot of traveling ends up really giving you a unique position to really sit down and go, there's a lot going on. Where do I need to kind of scale back sometimes where you might have not seen it when you get to do everything via Zoom?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I underestimated the boring things like packing and planning. And then for me, I sometimes have to drive to airports that are farther away than I used to. So it was like the toll of that, while mostly good in total, by the end of the summer, early fall, I was like, I got to reevaluate this. I didn't do a good estimation with myself. Now the work was outstanding. The work was totally
Mhm.
fun. I totally jazzed by that. The clients were phenomenal. But I'm not such a big fan of all the stuff that gets me to the work. And so I have to kind of continually recalibrate and remotivate myself around, like, yes, you have to plan to go get to the airport and do all that kind of good stuff. So you're right. I mean, and then the time on the road, there are large gaps where you're just, in the airport, you're thinking, you're reflecting. And I think you raise a good point about, at least in my experience, I probably gave things like the next year even more thought even earlier than I normally would have. I mean, I tend to do this around this time of the year anyway, but that period over the last 6 months, those periods allowed me to think even farther ahead and really be thinking about the questions you raised. Do I really like this? Am I just kind of slogging through? Am I adding enough value? So it's a potentially a time to really kind of sit down and just kind of be with yourself, because you do have that downtime, right? Until you get back and it starts all over again. So
And I think that's the blessing and the curse in it too. I joke that now I'm so used to we've gotten used to the downtime. I will wait until the last minute to pack. I'm like, let's experience everything else. I don't want to have to deal with the unpacking, especially if you have like 72 hours to do it. You're like, okay, I want to get in. I don't want to just unpack again. I'll do all these things. And then you're like, last minute, oh, this will only take 10 minutes. Whoever ever packs in just 10 minutes ever, I give major kudos to. I've traveled many times in my life, personally and professionally. And no matter how prepared I think I am in my head of what outfits I'm going to need, this and that, whether it's due to weather or just the amount of things, or when you actually get to the suitcase, you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend that short amount of time packing. It ends up getting elongated more than the 10 minutes. And traveling to the airport, you got to put in the time for, okay, what happens if you get stuck in traffic or flight gets delayed, if you have meetings after flight's
Mhm.
supposed to land, like how do you juggle that? But it also gives you the opportunity to sit with yourself, do some work and get check those off the boxes, but also start to evaluate over time, what can I be using with this time? And I think, as you said, the reflection is a great opportunity to say, what am I wanting to do? Is there a way to spread it out? Is there this? Is it a just something where it's a accumulation of just a life, right?
Mm,
Of, oh, we were just talking about this. Two of my best friends got married and I was in the wedding. So there's all those life events happening for them where you have to show up, that no matter how much I planned everything else, that was going to fall in.
right.
And so you don't have the choice sometimes to just show up and things get thrown on the plate.
That's right. That's right. You got it.
For you, as you look at clients now and as your business has grown and you go into different parts of your business growth, how do you approach your business growth?
So each year I tend to I do like a little retrospective on myself and my growth. So what do I think worked well that year? What I think didn't work so well? What am I just interested in? So for 2023, I really wanted to do more training and meeting facilitation work. And I got aligned with a wonderful consulting firm that uses me in a third party capacity. And I did a lot of that. So I realized that goal. I also had a second goal of doing more group and or team coaching, but felt like I needed some more certification and kind of training support on that. Didn't make that goal this year. So I'm looking at that in terms of next year. So I'm constantly thinking about how I can stay relevant and true to my core business, but also have enough different offerings, because they all kind of can link together. Sometimes I'll do a group training and some individuals will want some individual coaching, or vice versa. or I'll facilitate a meeting and that'll lead to some other type of work. So I was trained to do all this stuff in my earlier parts of my career, and I loved it. I think I kind of joked that I was always sort of kind of a closet HR professional for the entirety of my career, even though I only spent 2 years doing that. But we were really well trained at Kaiser where I worked, and we got a lot of investment in us, and the company took that really seriously, and my bosses took that really seriously, and I took it seriously. So a lot of the stuff that I do, I was doing in a different professional context before. I just make it my own now and offer it to different people. And so that's kind of I'm always kind of reflecting, but especially toward the year end, what do I want to set up for the next development opportunity for myself? And I talk with a lot of coaches a lot, and it's easy for us to not invest in ourselves. We're investing so much in other people. And I don't just mean dollars, just the time and the energy and the thought process. And so it's also helpful to have that community of folks say, well, hey, what are you focusing on next year for you or for your business? Like, how do you want to make it better or make it different or more effective? So having that community of folks to kind of trade ideas back and forth, because I always learn something. I may not do it myself, but I'm always like, I didn't think about that. That's an interesting point of view. Let me kind of contemplate that. So,
And I think it's always important, like you've brought up a few times during this conversation, is really having those moments of reevaluation
mhm,
and setting those goals, because then you can also see by trying something out, where did it fall? Where
mhm,
did things not grow? What might I have not taken into account that I should have taken into account? So that even if those are your 5 year goals or goals you set yearly, you can kind of pivot and change them accordingly.
right, right. Yeah, I agree.
Kevin, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, well, I think you said at the top, you can find me on LinkedIn at Kevin P. Jordan, Jordan. My website is kevinjordan.coach. And then you can always just email me too at kevin@kevinjordan.coach.
Thank you, Kevin, for all of your insight today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Really appreciate your time and your energy. It's a great show. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being such a wonderful guest and joining today. And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation are: what is your calling and what is your craft? Identify those two things. And like Kevin had brought up, they can change over time. So keep asking yourself those questions. What is my calling? What is the purpose? What is my craft today? What do you want to hone in on? As well as be comfortable with knowing what you don't know.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's okay to ask questions you think might be looked down upon, or might be annoying to ask, or might pin you in a certain light, because I can bank on the fact that there's other people in the room thinking the same exact things, just don't have the guts to actually say it. And I've been in many spaces where I bring up the fact I'm not the knowledge expert in this area. Kevin has done it. What is this? Let me understand. And I've had people come up to me after a call or after a meeting, like, I was thinking the same thing. I just didn't want to ask.
Right.
Or they've gotten to be like, well, Olivia's gonna ask it. She doesn't care. So you know what? Be that person for everyone else too, because there's someone else thinking it. They just don't feel comfortable enough to say it. So be the voice for others. You can always look at it that way,
We go.
as well as the importance of informational interviews. Identify that who in your industry you want to learn from, who you can rely on, build those relationships, ask those questions, learn from them, because good, bad, or different, they're in your space. And building those relationships also allows you to collaborate and gives you, especially as Kevin and I have discussed in this, being solo entrepreneurs, you don't have a full team all the time being able to bounce ideas off. So build yourself that network to really be able to collaborate with and elevate. This was a great episode with our top notch guest, Kevin Jordan. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.